Hey guys, time to walk through arteries, and I wanted to start with a stick figure looking something like this. Nothing fancy, just typical. Great. So if we look at this stick figure, what's great is that just based on the different body locations, we can already start to name some of our arteries. So for example, if we looked here at this stick figure, over here we know this is where you'd find the temples, and sure enough there are some arteries over in this area that are the temporal arteries. If we come down to the armpit, you might remember that's called the axillary region, and indeed there is an axillary artery. The brachium here, the arm, has a brachial artery. And if we could see maybe somewhere the hand here, we'd know that the radius is on the rad side, right? We've got thumbs up for the radius. So we'd look here for the radial artery, and then kind of over on our other side for the ulnar artery. If we travel down our stick figure, we know the femur is around here, and there's a femoral artery. And the tibia is medial to the fibula. You can look down at your own body to verify that. So we'd look over on this side, medial, for the tibial artery. In fact, there's two tibial arteries we'll talk about. That means on the other side, you'd be looking for your fibular artery. So that's a pretty good start, just starting with our stick figure. And if we had a slightly more advanced diagram, we could do even a little more. So this is a diagram from your book, and right away you can see that we have the temporal artery showing, just like we did in our stick figure. But in the face there are also some branches of the facial artery. And we're not concerned with them specifically, but if they're in the face, we know those are facial arteries. We can also see an artery here that kind of disappears and dips under the clavicle. So it's like a submarine. It's subclavian underneath the clavicle. And then here, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but this diagram is from your book. You can see there's an artery that branches into three separate areas. And right now I'm just concerned with the branching part, the first part, which we know from different lessons, anytime you have that branching, you're talking about a trunk. And in fact, this is the celiac trunk, and we'll learn later more about the specifics of what it branches into. But I saw a trunk, and we're just naming things here that are named after where we find them, or maybe their morphology. On this diagram, we can see also our kidneys here. So we won't be surprised to know we have renal arteries that are drawing blood into our kidneys. And then here below the renal arteries, there are two that are kind of small, and they're dropping down towards the gonads eventually. You can't really follow them far here, but while we're near the kidneys, I'll just point out that those gonadal arteries are the two that kind of drop down towards the gonads. Now the next big structure we can see is the ilium, the iliac crest here. And in fact, this branch is named after the ilium, as you expected. So here and here, these are our iliac arteries. But very quickly, those branch, and those branches you'll see here and here. And in the iliac arteries, there's an internal and an external. So the external is more lateral, so over here is the external branch. And the internal branch is medial, so this is your internal branch of the iliac artery. So if we keep looking in this area, we should branch out and visit our arms again. We did the subclavian earlier. We had talked on our stick figure about the axillary artery near the armpit and the brachial artery in the arm. Here we can see the thumb again, so we know that this is our radial artery on the radius side and ulnar artery on the ulnar side. But we also have these arches. There's one here and there's one here. Those are our palmar arches in our palm. Right, so named after their morphology and their location. And there's both a superficial and a deep. Now we know superficial and deep refers to the depth underneath the skin, but another way you might think of it as the arch, the palmar arch that goes deeper down the arm, or more distal, is this one. This is kind of deeper in the arm, right? It's farther from the trunk. So this is actually our deep here, which means the other one is our superficial palmar arch. So as we continue from the iliac here, that branched into the internal and external iliac, we're going to keep following the external iliac. That's the bigger branch. And as we follow it down, we're here in the femur. I mentioned that earlier, the femoral artery. And you'll notice there's lots of branches. There's branches here, here, and here, and here, and here, and here, here, here. And of course all of these branches will continue to branch and branch into smaller and smaller vessels until they're about the size of a single red blood cell. So you don't want to get too distracted by all of those branches. If you need to know those in a future class, you'll learn them. But now we're just worried about the femoral artery primarily. And we'll follow that down until it kind of dips here behind the kneecap. We had seen the popliteus muscle behind the kneecap, and now we have a popliteal artery. So this area of the body is the popliteal area. And then we're kind of still behind the bones of the lower leg here, so you can't see them too well, but there's roughly 1, 2, 3 arteries all running down the leg there. And we know that the tibia is kind of here, more medial. So one of those arteries runs in front of the tibia. So we have an anterior tibial artery. One's kind of behind it a little bit, so there's a posterior tibial artery. And then the one closest to the fibula, right, most lateral, is the fibular artery. And again, you can't see them great here, but on a model or on a diagram you have in front of you, you can see a little better where each of those lie. And the last thing we'll look at here is we have these little branches that are going towards the feet. And they'll continue to branch, and there's some arches and things like that. But we're really just interested here as we enter the feet. What are these vessels called? And those are the dorsalis pedis. So they're the arteries of the feet, pedestrian pedis, found dorsally. So with this diagram we can add on to what we saw in our stick figure, get a little bit more detailed. But there is one other place I wanted to look at closely, and that's the heart here. So we've already talked a lot about the heart. We talked about the kind of beefy left ventricle wall and how it pushes blood up and out of the body, out of the heart. And so we can see that happening here. It's pushing it through the aortic semilunar valve and up into the aorta. But the parts of the aorta have their own specific names. So as blood climbs up this part of the aorta, kind of ascends up the aorta, we call this section the ascending aorta. And as it arches over, we call it the aortic arch. And then it starts to drop, and as it drops, we can't really see it all, but it drops and drops and drops. And as it drops, we call all of that the descending aorta. So this is descending aorta, here's descending aorta, here's descending aorta. Anywhere it's kind of blood is flowing downwards. But we can get a bit more specific with the descending aorta and say when we're in the thoracic cavity, we can call this portion the thoracic aorta. And after we've crossed the diaphragm and we're in the abdomen, this is the abdominal aorta. So last but not least is how do things branch off of the aortic arch? So it's important to note that the left and right side are not identical. And there are three main branches. I'll just darken here. There's a branch here, kind of running to the head. There's a branch here, running out this way. And there's a branch here. So these three branches, well, let's start on the left side of the body. And we know we're on the left side because we can go back to our heart and see the left ventricle there, make sure we're in the right place. But here you can see there's one of these branches is running up into the head, and that is the common carotid. When you take your pulse with 2 fingers, you're doing it here and feeling for the common carotid on the left side. This other branch we actually already saw and talked about. If we could see a clavicle, we would know it was dipping underneath the clavicle, which makes this the subclavian artery. And here on the right side now, we can see this will split. And anytime we have a split, we know that this must be called a trunk. And indeed, this is the brachiocephalic trunk. And this is a great name because one branch of this trunk will go to the arm and one will go to the head, which are what those words mean. And those branches will have the same name as on the left side. So this branch that's running up into the head must be another common carotid. And this branch running to the arm will first dive under the clavicle, and so this must be the right subclavian artery. So we started at Happy Man, and then we had our more involved diagram, and here's a closer look at the heart. What that leaves is the ability perhaps to draw out all of these, and then some extra detail from start to finish, and that will be in a different video. Thanks. Oh, and here's my